Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm doing my book review on All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, and I just finished it a few days ago. I needed some time to think about it, and I would say right now my review on it is a 4 out of 5. Before I go into the review, I would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button, if you gave this video a thumbs up, and if you gave a comment if you read the book. If you haven't read the book before, I would love to hear feedback on what you think I can do for my channel. So before I start talking about the book, I always like to give a bit of background about the author, Anthony Doerr. So this book was actually his second novel. He writes short stories and novels, and this was his second novel that he wrote in 2014, and it actually won the Pulitzer Prize award, which I always hear about. And I'm like, oh, that's like a big reward for if you're an author, right? So I actually did some Googling about what the award is. So the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction actually started in 1917, and the premise of the award, or the context of the award, is if it was written about the American life, which is interesting because this book, All the Light We Cannot See, is actually about World War II and set in France, a bit of Germany, a bit of Russia, and a bit of Austria. So it's interesting to me that this book won the Pulitzer Award for fiction, but maybe since 1917, the categories have changed, and maybe if a book is really amazing, they don't mind bending the rules a little bit. I actually couldn't Google too much about Anthony. He is known as an author. He has 2 kids and married. His kids are twins, and also he lives in Idaho. So I actually find that kind of refreshing because it shows that his passion is writing. That's what he really focuses on, and he has no controversy or drama about himself either. So one thing that I'm really excited about this book is back in 2019, they actually were signed off to do a short TV series adaptation, and in 2021 Netflix actually signed to take over the TV production. And then this January 2022, so only a month ago, it's been announced that Mark Ruffalo and Hugh Laurie is going to play the two of the male parental figures in the book, which I'll get into later. So that's pretty exciting because it doesn't really matter who plays these characters, but it's kind of cool too that they have like 2 pretty well-known stars associated to the TV series. And I'm also really glad they're making a TV adaptation versus a movie, because this book is actually pretty thick. It actually took me about 2 weeks to finish. It's not a difficult read, but it is like a very gloomy topic, and it is over 500 pages. So I'm really glad they decided to do a TV adaptation and not just a movie, because a movie would have cut off so many details of this novel. We'll start with where the book is set. So as I said before, the book is kind of gloomy because it's set during World War II. The book time hops quite a bit, so it's a lot of it's between, I think it even goes as far back as 1939, but primarily between 1940 to 1944, up until I guess right at the end of the war. And then it's also set in Germany, a lot in France, and then some parts also, I believe it was Austria, Vienna, and also Russia as well. And that's where the book is set. There's actually 3 characters that we follow, or I would say 3 timelines, plot lines. Although there's 3, there's really only 2 in my mind when I read it, which was Werner, the German boy, and Marie-Laurre, who is the French Parisian girl. There is also von Rumpel, who is a German or a Nazi gemologist, and he's the main antagonist of the book. I feel like his timeline's quite small, but he's important because without him, then all the plot lines wouldn't come together at the end. As I said before, there are 3 plot lines, and for a majority of the book, they are kept pretty separate. And for a long time when I was reading it, I wasn't sure how it would come together, but that's why von Rumpel was really important, because he really ties everyone to like a very intense moment for the story. So the first storyline talks about Werner, who is a German boy. Him and his sister Jutta are growing up in a small town in Germany, and Their father died in a mining accident. It's not really clear to me if it's a coal mine or a steel mine or maybe both, but basically they grew up quite poor in the orphanage. The town didn't have much, and then it's told from his perspective. So then all of a sudden the town, everyone has more food, everyone has money to spend, and you can kind of guess it's because this is when the Nazi Party was gaining its power, and this town, this mining town was also very helpful to the cause. So basically Werner and Judah are in this orphanage, and it's kind of cool because you see the perspective of how like there's two boys in the orphanage that became part of the Nazi Party or really into it, but most people in Germany at the time didn't necessarily support the Nazi Party. And then Werner and his sister Jutta also come across a small radio, and he kind of figures out and tinkers with it how to fix it. And once he does that, him and his sister Jutta, they listen to these broadcasts from all over. And there's one broadcast to listen to every night where it is a Frenchman who plays music and also does like science knowledge tidbits. And it's kind of cool because then you can see that Werner and Jutta also know French. It's not very clear what their heritage is because they are orphans, but they can speak German and French, and they both have very blonde, actually very white hair and blue eyes, but they don't know if they're for sure of German descent. And so when Werner starts playing with these radios, he's very curious, and that's kind of like his like I guess his natural talent. So over time in his story, he starts becoming like the town radio fixer, and because of this, he's kind of known in the region as the boy who can fix anything for radios. So he actually gets recruited by the Nazi Party to go to this like training camp for youths to be trained, I guess, to be part of the Nazi Party. It wasn't clear in the book what the training was, but I Googled like what were some similar things that happened to German youth at the time. So it's called the National Political Institute of Education, and it's a type of boarding school meant to instill Nazi values and train them to be Nazi soldiers. So that's what Werner kind of became, and like it's just interesting because personally I don't know a lot about the World War II and all these details, or I only know World War II from what I learned in the Canadian high school system. So it's kind of cool to hear this perspective, although it's fictional, of course, but to hear his perspective of a youth in Germany, and his experience of it wasn't so much that he wanted or even like outright knew he was supporting the Nazi Party, but like he is from a small town, and he's an orphan, and he's given this opportunity to have like free room and board, to have more opportunity to work on these skills and his interest in radios. So basically in the boarding school, he's also recruited to figure out how to triangulate signals, and how to also find where radio signals are coming from. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but in the book, it says that in Germany, basically the Nazi Party intercepts any shortwave radio frequency, and they erected a really big radio tower, so everyone that listens to the radio in Germany can only listen to specific programs that are approved by the Nazi political party. So it's a very great skill that Werner has, because basically he's able to figure out who's broadcasting, if they're enemies, and also finding a location, and then also destroying them. So that's kind of like his story. And then it kind of talks about once he goes to training camp, there's a lot of like how it kind of shows how like boys, because obviously most of the recruits are boys, how it's really easy to be I guess brainwashed, or not even just brainwashed, but forced, because you're in this boarding school where you're kind of pushed to your limits, and also like a need to belong, and also a lot of shaming. So in a way, I feel like it gives this book kind of gives a bit of empathy on people who eventually became part of the Nazi parties, because for a lot of them, it wasn't like it was a choice, and maybe it was a lot of grooming, and also like a lot of them felt like they didn't have a choice. Although this novel talks a lot about how Werner, he does eventually become part of the Nazi party, obviously, and it shows that, you know, there always is a choice in your actions. The second main character is Marie-Laure, or Marie-Laure. It's a French name, so I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. But for this video, I'll say Marie-Laure, I guess. And so basically, she is a girl who lives in Paris with her father. It wasn't actually clear his name was Daniel in the book, but then when I read later, he has names. So I thought he was just always Papa. But anyway, so they live in Paris, and he's the locksmith for the National Museum in Paris. And the story starts when she's young, and you know, she goes to a school field trip at the museum, and you know, the tour guide kind of shares this like legendary fantasy tale of this diamond called the Sea of Flames, where basically it's like the biggest diamond in the world, and it's blue, but then there's like flecks of red in the middle. That's why it's called the Sea of Flames. And back in the day, there was a prince who sought to find it, and then when he did find it, what it does is it grants you immortality, but then at the cost of losing everything and everyone around you. So it's kind of like that like age-old question of what's more important, your life or others, and that kind of stuff. So the tour guide for her school field trip kind of insinuates that the diamond is at the museum, but then it's kept behind 13 doors, and then no one's ever actually seen the diamond. So this is important, this random diamond story, because after Marie-Laure hears the story, she actually starts going blind, and the book never says explicitly why she went blind, but just start happening after the field trip. So I guess it's open to your interpretation. So basically, because she's blind, she has to relearn the world. So she goes to work every day with her father, and she starts developing a lot of interest in like mollusks and snails and that kind of stuff. Not really important for me to tell you now. You have to read the book to find out. And also, her father is also like I guess like I don't know what it's called, like a wood carver. So to help his daughter, he carves a miniature to scale of their neighborhood, so she's able to navigate and walk around by herself, even to the park or the garden. So, you know, she would walk the model with her fingers and then count the exact same paces in real life. So this is really important, I guess, because it just shows her father's dedication to her, especially with her being blind. And it's really beautiful because, you know, like, it's not rare, but I guess, you know, you kind of stereotype that the father is sometimes not like at the most as affectionate parent. So it's really cool to see how he goes above and beyond for his daughter, and it's really nice to see. So they're in Paris, they have this like life together, which is great, and it's very routine, despite Marie-Laure being blind. And then one day, it's World War II, so basically they have to flee Paris because the Germans and the Nazis are coming. So then they flee Paris to go to the coast, which is Saint-Malo, which is a coastal city, I think the most western city in France. So they flee to the city to join her great uncle Etienne, who is a recluse because he was part of the First War and he saw his own brother die. So he's kind of like this eccentric recluse that stays at home all the time. So while Marie-Laure and her father Daniel are fleeing Paris, the director at the museum in Paris made 3 duplicates of the Sea of Flames, and he gave one to 4 people that works for the museum, one of them being Marie-Laure's dad. And so one person has the real Sea of Flames and 3 people do not. And he sends them all different ways from Paris. So there's a higher chance of the real diamond escaping the grasp of the Nazi party. Because I think in this book, I don't know if it's true or not, but then it insinuates that basically the Nazi party would like try to confiscate art and jewels and keep it for themselves or sell it. So, you know, as a curator and director of the museum, you want to keep all your valuables safe. So he basically sends all these art and all these diamonds at the museum to like different parts of France. And then the third character, or the third plot line, so the first one was Werner, the second one is Marie-Laure and her father in Saint-Malo, and then the third one, we have Sergeant Major Renaud von Rumpel. So he is basically, as I said before, a gemologist in the German Nazi Party, and he is the main antagonist because we find throughout the book that he's diagnosed with a terminal illness. I think it's cancer. So he, as the book progresses, he's in more and more pain, and it's hard for him to walk, harder for him to breathe, and basically he is obsessed with finding the Sea of Flames because he truly believes that once he acquires it, he will gain immortality and he'll be free from his disease. So in this book, he is, I would say, like I said before, the book is mostly about Werner and Marie-Laurre, but Von Rumpel is important because he's kind of like that sneaky antagonist. You're like, oh, like, yeah, he's still in the picture. So as I said before, the book follows all three timelines, and it jumps between all three, plot lines of Werner, Marie-Laurre, and Von Rumpel, and then also it bounces back and forth between like early 1940s to mid 1940s. So the book can be a bit hard to keep track of, but I think that is kind of the point because, it is a time of World War II and things can be scary, things are always changing. So I think it's kind of meant to be kind of a bit confusing and also a bit tense. I actually felt the book really hard to read through quickly because it was such a gloomy topic, and at 2 points actually during my reading sessions I actually thought about not finishing a book because it just made me really sad because World War II wasn't a great time. The characters are in occupied France, so I was really worried that there would be no happy ending. I'm not going to give any spoilers because I do think the book is worth reading. Just be prepared to be gloomy and kind of feel a sense of dread throughout the whole book. But ironically enough, that's why the antagonist Von Rumpel is important to the story, because without him, then Marie-Laurre and Werner's paths would not have come together for a not so bad ending to the novel. I want to talk about some common themes in the book that I noticed. Obviously every book has themes, but I felt like this book, I want to add to my review this section because I felt like it was very apparent throughout the book, and I felt they were really important as well. So the first theme, that mostly in, I think, Werner's plot line is, do we have a choice in life? Because, as I said, this book is set during World War II. A lot of times, you're just surviving. You're not really able to think about what you want to do next or what you're even doing tomorrow because you're really just in the moment and you just want to stay alive. So this book throughout the whole novel kind of talks about that, not just about having a choice to survive or not, but also having a choice to cause pain to someone or not. A lot of times during the book, the characters, especially Werner when he's older and patrolling the land, he never explicitly kills anyone, but his fellow soldiers do, and you kind of think about like should he have stopped them? Is he able to? What are the consequences? And not to give away the ending, obviously, but I think this book makes you think about that a lot. If we do have choices in our life, even if we're in a situation where we're being a soldier for a Victorian party. So I thought that was really interesting. And also a common theme in this book is the image or the symbolism of water. So when Marie-Laurre is still in Paris, her dad gives her a book in Braille for blind people, and it's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So this book is again talking about water, obviously set in water. And later on in the book, there's a line where Werner writes to his younger sister back to the orphanage, and he says, referring to the ocean, "It is my favorite thing I think that I've ever seen. Sometimes I stare at it and forget my duties. It seems big enough to contain everything anyone could ever feel." So I thought that was a really great line because it's kind of talking about how when you're looking at the ocean and looking at the waves, it's easy to just kind of forget what's happening in your reality. And it's also so beautiful that he said it seems big enough to contain everything anyone could ever feel. I thought that was really beautiful. So there's a symbol of the ocean to Werner that it's almost like it makes him forget about his current situation. And also later on, Marie-Laurre, when she's in Saint-Malo, her and her uncle's caretaker, Madame Manic, go to the ocean, and it's Marie-Laure's first time. And it's really cool because like she's blind, so she describes what the ocean is like the sand between her toes and the waves crashing, and how the sound of the waves coming towards you can be very overwhelming, but it's also very beautiful. And again, I think the ocean for her is also about having this freedom and being carefree, because you know they were living in fear every day. They weren't sure what was going to happen, but being in the ocean and just kind of forgetting your worries, I think that's a constant symbol in the book. And also why I brought up the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. There was a point in the book where she is able to broadcast radio signals out to the world, and she reads excerpts from the book. I don't really want to spoil the book because I do think it's really worth reading, but you know, like when she reads the book out loud on the radio channel or the radio frequencies, it's a big plot trigger point that happens later on that involves Werner. And as I said before, like, you know, Werner, his job as a German soldier is to listen for radio frequencies and stuff. So I guess you can kind of guess what happens. So yeah, it's really cool how there's that constant symbol of water and being carefree, forgetting your troubles, and then also this like connection, I guess, because you know water is a source of life for us and it's everywhere in the world and we need it. So I really love that symbolism of water in this novel. Another line I love in this book that I thought was a cool like theme or reminder was it's said a few times in the book, but the first time it comes up is on page 86. It's open your eyes and see what you can do with them before they close forever. So I love that line because I feel like we can all apply it to our lives. It's really talking about how, you know, when you die, you're dead and you're dead forever as far as we know, right? So it's like, you know, before that happens, open your eyes, see what you can do, see what opportunities there are, and see how much of an impact you can have. Not saying that you have to change the world, but even just changing the people around you, having an impact in your neighborhood, in your community, in your family, and, you know, just seizing the day, I guess. So I really like that line. It's a reminder because in this novel, they were set during World War II, and it's saying that even such a dark time, you can see what potential there is. Other common theme in this book, which is probably no surprise because again, it's set in World War II, is the idea of death. And one thing the author kind of describes is a lot of the German soldiers, when they go and do things, they know it's like they're walking to their death and they're well aware of it, which is like such a sobering thing to think about. Like, you know, think about how if you were told to do something, you didn't really want to do it. It's kind of against your will because if you don't comply, something bad will probably happen to you. So you have to comply. So just knowing ahead of time that you're walking to your death, which is pretty like effing sobering to think about, right? And then also, it kind of goes back to other line in the book. It says, in the end, none of us will avoid it. Again, talking about death, because one thing that all humans have, or all creatures on the earth share, is the idea that death is going to happen to us. We don't know when, we don't know how, but it's going to happen. It's something that's a shared experience. There's an excerpt I actually wanted to read, which I thought was really beautiful, but also like a bit frightening, which is the opposite of death. So if you read this book, it's on page 468. So, we all come into existence as a single cell, smaller than a speck of dust, much smaller. Divide, multiply, add and subtract. Matter changes hands. Atoms flow in and out. Molecules pivot. Proteins stitch together. Mitochondria send out their oxidative dictates. We begin as a microscopic electrical swarm. The lungs, the brain, the heart. 40 weeks later, 6 trillion cells get crushed in the thighs of our mother's birth canal, and we howl. Then the world starts in on us. I just thought this passage was so powerful because it just makes you think how life is so precious. We literally start as like a single cell, and it's amazing how we even exist because it's a miracle that, you know, your father's sperm finds your mother's egg, and not only does it have to do that, but it also has to like be a successful fusion. And then as a cell, you have to divide like millions and billions of times over to become a baby. And even giving birth is such a crazy miracle. And then once you're out in this world, like, you know, your mom and dad have to take care of you. And in this book, actually, Marie-Laure's mom doesn't, I think, survive giving birth. So I just really love that passage because it just shows like we've we literally come from nothing, and it's so amazing. And then once we're born into the world from our mom's birth canal, the world is just so overwhelming, so in on us. And like the world is like such a scary thing because there's so much to navigate, but also so beautiful because there's so many opportunities. And once you're born, you know the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to die. You don't know when, so you just need to open your eyes and you need to just seize the world and just do what you can with your like precious life. One major thing I didn't like about the book, and it's my only critique actually, was it was so gloomy and filled with dread. But I guess that's the point of a book, and how can you write a cheery World War II book? But having said that, for me personally, after reading this book, I actually don't know if I'll read a book set in World War II again, just because it was quite gloomy, and there were a few times where I didn't even want to finish the book. But in the end, I'm glad I powered through. But I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not going to intentionally read a World War II book again. Or if I do, I'm going to sandwich it between two perky books. Because right now, the book I'm reading after this book is actually a very light book. And it's just nice to read a book, even though it's fictional, where everything goes right at the end. So I personally gave this book a 4 out of 5. And on Goodreads, the book got 4.32 out of 5, which is pretty high on Goodreads when you consider it's thousands of people writing reviews. So having an average of 4.32 is quite high. So I'll start with the negatives of the reviews I saw on Goodreads. Some common negative experiences was there was too much time hopping between the different stories. And some people said, like, obviously time hopping can help if it drives the plot and there's a reason for it. But it felt like this book, they just did it just because, and it didn't add to the story. Other critique was, as it is a fictional book, there's a bit too much fantasy mixed in with World War II. I think this person was referring to the Sea of Flames, the diamond, which, you know, grants immortality. And I guess if I think about it, it does seem kind of a bit too comical that a Nazi soldier would be so obsessed with finding this diamond. You know, if it was a real story. I mean, obviously it isn't a real story, but it's just hard to imagine why someone would be so obsessed with finding this diamond and really believing that it'll grant him immortality. Maybe it'd be more realistic or believable if he was finding this diamond to be granted millions and billions of dollars. Some people that liked about the book, which also I've shared for me personally, was they love how it showed both sides of the war and how it affected everyday people, and not just the grand scheme of things. It's not about like, oh, like Germany versus France and then the victors and, you know, the allies and the axis and that kind of stuff. It was really just focused on the daily people. And, you know, WERNER and MARIELAURE, they weren't really ever explicitly on either side of the war. They didn't have any political affiliations or like, oh, I'm so proud to be French or German. They were just two people who were born into the situation, and things that happened to them, they didn't ask for it. So it's kind of cool to, I guess, show that. People gave it really high reviews because they found it haunting and heartbreaking, which for me that was a negative. But I guess sometimes it's important that, you know, books aren't always going to be happy and cheery, and it's good to, I don't know, be heartbroken about something. Yeah, so those are kind of the reviews. Oh, one person also said, but I felt this was a pro for the book, is that there's a lot of jumping between the plot lines and jumping between the years. But also the other thing that happens is I don't think there's any chapter in this book that's over 5 pages. So that means like a lot of them are actually only 1 or 2 pages or 3 pages. So there's actually quite a bit of jumping back and forth and keeping tabs. So a lot of people didn't like that because, as I said earlier, it didn't add to the story. But then some people were saying that that's actually a good thing because it kind of captures the atmosphere and the environment of being and living in a war, and how like things can be very chaotic and very quick, and they happen really suddenly. So I guess with that review, you can see that as like a pro or a con, but just to give you a heads up if you decide to read this book. So with every book review, I like to always share the feeling this book gave me. If you haven't seen my other videos, I always say that with every book I've ever read, and when I ask people what books they recommend, I always love to ask them what feeling a book gave them, because you know, years later when you ask me about a book, I'll probably won't remember the character names or really the plot details, but I'll always kind of remember how a book made me feel. So this book, All the Light We Cannot See, I would give it, the feeling it gave me was a feeling of dread, which maybe isn't a good feeling, but you know, that's how I felt during the whole book. Like it wasn't clear to me where the story was going for a lot of the time because of the separate plot lines, and I wasn't really sure or confident if the characters were gonna make it or not. No spoilers, no spoiling. If they do make it or not, you have to read to find out. But I just had a feeling of dread really all the way up until, like, I would say like at least page 450, which is like 50 pages from the end. So if you want a book where you might feel a lot of dread and you know, maybe you like that feeling, go for it. I probably would not read this book again. It was pretty heavy, it was quite long, and I felt like reading it again won't make me feel any different way or discover anything that's different. But I am looking forward to the TV adaptation because I'm sure that will be really good to rewatch instead of rereading this book. Okay, so if you did read this book, All the Light We Cannot See, leave the comments below what your review was, what was your experience. Did you agree with me? Did you not agree with me? I always love to have a discussion. And if you want to join me for my next book, it is called Instructions for Dancing by Nicola Yoon. And as I said before, after reading All the Light We Cannot See, I felt very gloomy and it took me about 2 weeks to finish. This book I only started 2 days ago, but it's so different from the previous book that I'm already almost done. So I'll probably post reviews sooner than later. So yeah, if you want to join or if you have read this book, come see my next video to see to leave a comment. All right, bye guys.